So yeah, thanks for joining us today, everyone. We are going to be talking about ESOS today and changes to the ESOS compliance requirements. Firstly, just to introduce ourselves. So my name's Adam. I'm the head of commercial at Energise. I've been with Energise for just over 6 years, and in roles before my commercial role, I was an energy consultant in the team, so delivered quite a few energy surveys in ESOS Phase 2, so I have a good understanding as what's required and how it's done. Sarah, do you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Adam. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining. My name's Sarah. I'm the Key Account Director here at Energise. I've been with Energise just short of 12 years, so have worked with our customers over Phase 1 and Phase 2 and now Phase 3 of ESOS. I have a consultancy background, so yeah, here to help you today.
Thanks, Sarah. So an introduction to Energise for those who don't know us. So we are an award-winning net zero and sustainability consultancy, supporting organisations in being a force for good. We supported ESOS customers from Phase 1 into Phase 2 and now into Phase 3, as well as other similar compliance schemes such as the CRC scheme that ended a few years ago and SECR. We go beyond compliance to make sure that customers get the best value from what could be seen as a tick box exercise, and we'll talk about how we do that later on. In today's session, we'll cover what ESOS is, who it applies to, the process of ESOS, changes that have been implemented since Phase 2, and some success stories from one of our customers. As we go through, and you should see in the chat, please feel free to ask any questions. They'll all be collated and then we'll answer them at the end. So to start, what is ESOS? So ESOS is a compliance scheme which was originally set by the European Union and was enshrined into law in each of the member states of the European Union, hence why it's remained post-Brexit. That allows each member state or previous member state to then make their own adjustments to the minimum standards that the European Union set. ESOS as a compliance scheme requires all large businesses and organisations who meet a certain criteria to appoint a qualified ESOS Lead Assessor, measure their energy consumption, conduct energy audits, identify energy efficiency recommendations, and then report their compliance to the Environment Agency. ESOS Phase 3, like all ESOS phases, has compliance deadlines, which we'll talk about in a second. And by that deadline, the notification to the Environment Agency must be submitted. We now have changes to ESOS, which are different from Phase 1 and Phase 2, following a government consultation last year. And we're expecting to see some more larger, impactful changes in ESOS Phase 4. So who does ESOS apply to? So there is a set of criteria for ESOS, and it works that if you have more than 250 employees in a single entity, then you are required to do ESOS. And if you have less than 250 employees but have a balance sheet that is more than £38 million and a turnover more than £44 million, then you also need to do ESOS. ESOS is set so that if one entity within an organisation or a corporate structure meets the compliance criteria, then the entire corporate group must comply. So, for example, a private equity firm may have 5 or 6 portfolios companies within its structure. If one of those meets the criteria, then all of the organisations must do ESOS. Where we say businesses, there is a list that the Environment Agency provide, and that includes limited companies, public companies, trusts, partnerships, private equity firms and LLPs, not-for-profits and some charities, universities which get more than half of their funding from private sources, and then care home and healthcare services that do not qualify as public bodies. Timelines for ESOS is, so the qualification date, so the date in which you measure the criteria against, is the 31st of December 2022. And the compliance deadline, so the date in which you should submit to the Environment Agency, has been extended from the 5th of December 23 to the 5th of June 24. We believe that doing it as early as possible is better, so you can understand those savings and start making some changes to get the most of those. We are now just over 4 months away from the deadline, so we're actually getting pretty close. There are some penalties and some fines that are linked to not complying with ESOS, and they come in two kind of brackets. One of them is that if you fail to notify the Environment Agency, then you can get a fine, a fixed fine up to £500 plus £500 for each working day up to a maximum of 80 days. But if you fail to complete the audit, which is the key part of ESOS, then that fixed fine goes up to £50,000 plus £500 per working day for a maximum of 80 days. I'm going to hand over to Sarah now to talk us through how we do it.
Thanks, Adam. So the process that we follow to make sure that you comply with the requirements of ESOS is laid out here and fairly straightforward. So as soon as a proposal has been signed, we send you a welcome pack and also start the ball rolling with your data collection, because often that can be the most timely thing to gather your electricity, gas and fuel use across your portfolio. The welcome pack is there to lay out any handy hints that will make the process easier, and just to give you an understanding of who will be working on your project. During the data collection phase, we'll be working with you. We'll have a project kickoff meeting with you, explain, go through the scheme rules again, introduce you to a project team. At the same time, we'll be getting an understanding of your portfolio, so your sites, your fleet, based upon the data that you've provided. We'll then conduct a pre-survey energy analysis where we'll look at where your major energy consumers are, what can be excluded, so the things that we don't have to audit. Once we've got that to that position, we'll work with you then to highlight where we want to survey. You may have particular sites that you want us to survey, so we'll take that into consideration as well. We'll visit your site, identify the opportunities, and then once we're back off of site, we'll generate what we call a master ESOS report, which compiles everything that you need in order to submit to the Environment Agency. We'll generate your evidence pack. So should you ever be called for audit from the Environment Agency, that is your pack to show how you have complied with the scheme requirements. And we always support our customers through that process. We've been through a number of Environment Agency audits and never failed one yet, I'm pleased to say. We'll present you with a summary of findings, so a programme assessment of those recommendations that we've identified, what is applicable across your portfolio or what is applicable just for that site. We'll then hold a sign-off call with you and then notify the Environment Agency with you that you've complied with the requirements of ESOS. So part of the learning that we do throughout the phases of ESOS that we've carried out, phase 1 and 2, we've always developed on what we've delivered historically, because we're not just about, as Adam said at the beginning, a tick box exercise for us. It's about the wider sustainability journey that our customers can go on. So when we're on site and when we're preparing everything for ESOS, we're taking all of those other things into consideration that will support you on your net zero journey. So the reports that we've produced and produce as part of ESOS actually go a little bit further. So we take into consideration not only the energy that is being used at your site and within your fleet, we look at the carbon associated with that and make recommendations based upon any renewable technology. We also look at high level climate resilience, flood risk, sea level, depending upon where the site is and how that may impact you as an organisation. And we will also do a detailed data review of the best available data and industry best practice. So having a look at what is happening within the industry that you're actually working in, where you may be impacted by the impacts of climate change and what that means for you as an organisation. We will calculate energy and carbon against all recommendations so that you can understand from a net zero perspective, and organisations that are choosing to build on what ESOS offers to them and move that into a net zero strategy, you already have that information available to you and can really act as that solid foundation for those next steps. And we will also do a compliance health check for other building related activities. So where an EPC is required, for instance, or where a deck is required, or you have F-gas involved in your site, we will look at all of those things to ensure that you're also compliant.
Brilliant, thanks, Sarah. So that's an introduction to ESOS and how we would deliver it. It's quite high level. We could go on for hours about the details of ESOS. So if you have any questions, specific questions in more detail, please feel free to ask them, and we'll come to them at the end. So since phase 2 completed, we had a government consultation to identify how to strengthen the regulations around ESOS, ultimately with the aim to move it from being just around an energy focus to both being more net zero focused, carbon focused, as well as encouraging more action rather than it being you do ESOS, you leave it for 4 years, you do ESOS, you leave it for 4 years. So there are a number of changes that take effect for phase 3, and there are some more that we're expecting to see for phase 4. So to run through them, the de minimis has been reduced from 10% to 5%. So de minimis is a proportion of energy use in your organisation that you can put into a pot of de minimis that you do not need to cover with energy audits. So for a lot of organisations, that may be what we call grey fleet, which is personal employee cars that are claimed business mileage. Because they're a small proportion of energy, we can put them into de minimis and we don't need to audit them. Some organisations that we have supported on phase 1 and phase 2 were between 5 and 10% for their grey fleet energy consumption. So we can expect that we now need to audit that as part of phase 3. The requirements are now to include a suggested programme for implementing all or a selection of the energy saving opportunities, including timescales, costs, benefits and payback for each energy audit that we complete. An ESOS report is now required, which details the details of the organisation, including SIT codes, company numbers, which organisations have been included, who are the responsible director or directors, the energy consumption calculations, as well as the methodology, the energy savings that have occurred since the previous ESOS phase, so in this case, what has happened since phase 2, and then the details of how phase 3 compliance has been met, whether that's energy audits, ISO 50001, DECs or Green Deal assessments. That ESOS report must be shared with the other undertakings in the participant group. So by default, the compliance sits with the highest UK parent, and they can go and do all of the ESOS compliance themselves. I think what the Environment Agency had seen is that the undertakings that sit under the highest UK parent weren't getting the visibility of the findings, and this is now encouraging that to happen. Including additional details within the compliance notification. So right at the end of the compliance, you submit a notification to the Environment Agency as the scheme administrator. And that compliance notification used to be quite basic. It was effectively saying, have you done it? Who did it? Which organisations are covered by it? And which route did you take? The details now need to be the organisational details, lead assessor details, the methodology for sampling the sites, or the fleet, or the processes, energy consumption totals, plus breakdowns by type and use, energy intensity ratios, energy savings identified, and then some historical information from phase 1 and phase 2 of ESOS. There's a requirement to produce an ESOS action plan, which sets out intentions to reduce energy consumption, plus the timescales, expected energy savings, and paybacks that cover the 4-year period from the end of phase 3 to the start to the compliance deadline of phase 4. That's required to be submitted to the Environment Agency by the 5th of December. So they're keeping a line to the original compliance date. The Environment Agency will then publish those action plans, so they'll be publicly available. Following the action plan, each year an annual progress update is to be reported, again to the Environment Agency, and they will publicise that. We're not sure how they're going to do that yet, but we believe we'll find out once their new notification system is fully released. That annual progress update should include details of your progress against the actions that you've planned during that period, that 12-month period, the energy savings that that have come from that, any actions that you've planned but not taken, and some basic justifications for that. And that's required by the 5th of December 25 and the 5th of December 26. And then the 5th of December 27 would be the compliance deadline for ESOS phase 4. Sarah.
Thank you. So as we said, we're not just a compliance organisation. We really support our customers on their whole sustainability journey. One of our customers is Blackpool Pleasure Beach, and we have partnered with Blackpool since phase 1 of ESOS. So they've been through phase 1 and phase 2, and as an amusement park as well as a hotel, they had a whopping energy bill every year, and it was a real opportunity for them using ESOS as the springboard to identify substantial energy savings that they could implement in a cost-effective way. So during phase 2, they really built upon what they had done in phase 1, and during our extensive site visits, where we looked much more deeply at the processes that were being undertaken at site, they were able to identify projected cost savings of 18.5%, which was significant for them as an organisation. They didn't just stop there. What they wanted to do was then, how do we incorporate this in being able to go net zero? What does that look like for us? So we have a way of working which we call review, reduce, renew, rebalance. So it's about reviewing the carbon that is used, not just in relation to energy, but also incorporating scope 3. So we start looking at purchased goods and services, and then ways in which you can reduce that. We'll also look at renewable technologies and how that applies, and then what it takes to get to net zero, and what that journey looks like in terms of then how do you make yourself carbon neutral as an organisation on that journey. So for Blackpool, it wasn't just about being a tick box exercise. It was very much about taking their responsibility seriously, and how the impacts of climate change and also government policy on them as an organisation would impact them, and they used ESOS as a springboard to do that. So yeah, and we're still working with Blackpool today on their sustainability strategy.
Brilliant, thanks, Sarah. So why might you consider Energise to support you on your ESOS compliance journey? So we have a team of experts in-house that have the latest in-depth knowledge around the requirements and the guidelines of ESOS. We have our consultancy team has a combined experience of just over 200 years. So there's lots of experience to be falling back on. And that includes a team of 5 qualified lead assessors, so plenty of capacity to support on both the compliance, but also the advice and the knowledge of the requirements. Each of our customers are appointed a dedicated project lead who will make sure that you're familiar with what's required, as well as being kept up to date with progress updates throughout the journey. As Sarah mentioned, and as I mentioned at the start, we're really focused on not just using these compliance schemes as tick box exercises, and we want to deep dive to make sure that our customers get the most and get the best value from the piece of work that they're required to do. So we'll go under the bonnet, get more details, and make it as actionable as possible for you to take forward. Sarah mentioned earlier that we've done kind of lots of this work and we've been audited. So we've had over 700 compliance programs across ESOS, CRC, SECR, and we've been audited quite a few times across all of those, and we've got 100% audit pass rate across those. We've delivered over £58 million worth of savings, and we add around £10 million each year. As well as that, we've delivered over 750,000 tonnes of CO2e carbon savings and increases by the day. So now we've got an opportunity to answer some questions. I can see that we've got some. So the first one, for energy intensity metrics, would you suggest following the amendments within the legislation or the new EA guidance document? Great question. So there are discrepancies between, or not discrepancies, there are differences between the ESOS legislation and the ESOS guidance. The official word for the Environment Agency is that they can only assess against and issue enforcement notices against the legislation. So effectively, the legislation is the minimum standard, whereas the EA guidance, which is on the gov.uk website, is more best practice. And kind of following on from what we were saying earlier about getting the best value out of ESOS, our recommendation would always be to follow the best practice, and therefore following the Environment Agency guidelines. A couple of other questions. So what can you do following ESOS? The ESOS is a great springboard. So you've collected your most of your scope 1 and 2 emissions and some of your scope 3 in the travel and in the fleet and some travel emissions. You can then expand on that to then cover wider GHG emissions. So you could cover all of upstream scope 3 emissions. You could do upstream and downstream scope 3 emissions to then get a really good understanding of your baseline. If you are quite an energy intensive organization, then using the ESOS recommendations in your pathway to net zero has already been done by compliance. And then there's some extra bits that you can do to top up to understand the rest of your journey to net zero, whether that's engaging with your supply chain, understanding the use of your products through kind of life cycle assessments and how you can improve those, and then build them into a net zero strategy that you can then set targets. You can then get them validated by SBTi, and then publicize that's your journey, and obviously then start working on it. What sort of information do you require from the client at a site audit? The simple answer is the more information, the better. As a bare minimum, we need to know the energy consumption, what the operation is at the site, and we need to have a knowledgeable site contact available at the time. The more information we get, the more we can be prepared to look at certain things before we get on site, and we can produce a better report and a better outcome from that survey. So things like half-hourly electricity data, half-hourly gas data if available, floor plans, operating procedures of any equipment on the site. If there is already knowledge of where those significant energy consumption areas are, so if you have a factory and you know that your conveyors are the largest consumer, then having no knowledge of that beforehand. What that allows us to do is to create and analyze a picture before we get on site. So as soon as we step through the door, we know what we want to go and look at, rather than spending kind of 30 minutes trying to figure out what the site does and how to do it. Having that knowledgeable person on site is obviously really helpful because as the representative of the customer, they know the operation of that site much better than we do. We're kind of coming as a fresh pair of eyes to understand how they can reduce that emission, those energy consumptions. So their guidance around the site to kind of directors, obviously the kind of very kind of tactical stuff, i.e. unlocking doors and giving us codes to get into certain plant rooms, is really key. But also their knowledge of why does that do that? Why did we choose to do that?
I think just to add to that, Adam, and why we gather that information that we do and what we do with that information when it comes back to us. So we put all of that information into a building model program that we have, and it builds us a live model of how your building or operations operate, and then we're able to balance the energy, which really allows us to dig deeper into how we expand on the recommendations that we provide to you. So as Adam said, the more information, the better. It helps with our building modelling.
Perfect. And then finally, I mentioned that there was some more changes we can expect for phase 4. We obviously we're not entirely sure what they look like yet, but from the consultation document and from discussions in various forums, this phase 3 is kind of being seen as a bit of an interim measure before we get to the full answer. So a lot of these things in the guidance say you should do this, and in phase 4 we're expecting it to say you must do this, and that includes kind of mandating action from ESOS reports. So not just putting it in a filing cabinet and leaving it until next time. There must be a certain level of action that comes out of your ESOS report. They will be removing DEX and Green Deal assessments as routes to compliance. So the only ones that will be left are energy audits and ISO 50001. Introducing new standards for energy auditing and ESOS in general. There is an expectation that they will be reducing the compliance criteria down, so it aligns to SECR, so the 36 million and 18 million thresholds rather than 44 and 38. But they're a bit kind of up in the air. All of that is around getting us towards a more net zero approach of ESOS, and that is something that we're really keen to see happen. We're really keen to see action being mandated, so ESOS becomes actionable rather than that tick box exercise as we keep talking about. So we're quite excited to see what comes from the phase 4 updates. Finally, so thanks for joining us today. If you do have any additional questions or you'd like to find out more about how we can support you with ESOS, you can get in touch with us. Our email address is hello@energise.com. We have got a recording of this webinar, and it will be edited and updated and added onto a platform, and we'll be in touch as to where that is, and you can look back if you want to. Thank you very much for joining us, and we hope you have a great day.